John Ryan and Ken Shellerdoe, and we didn't do so well with those, did we?
No, I can remember going to Manchester City with John Ryan. He turned up in a white suit or cream suit, as though he sort of was owned the place. I think we lost 5-0, and I think that was probably getting towards the end of John Ryan's appearance with us, but
a bit more style than substance, perhaps.
Yes.
Okay, so we move towards the Crystal Moore, John Beck sort of eras.
Yes, John. Well, I got on all right with John. He rented a house next to me. So, I mean, there was the days I'd morning John and he'd hardly say anything, but other days he'd spend ages talking to me about football. And he always had a pile of books of all players and clubs, and he could reel off lots of things. And I always thank John, because he said to me, I've signed you £2 million players. And in theory he had. Armin O'Neill unfortunately didn't work out, and Dave Kitson. And as we know, Dave Kitson should have been sold, or was sold, but we should have had a sell-on a lot better than we actually got, because unfortunately our chairman at the time, George Rolls,
yes,
when I approached him, I thought he was going to be sold £100,000 plus a player. I said, didn't you read the press that several clubs were vying for him and the price was on the move up? But, and that's another story, isn't it?
Okay.
So John did sign. Obviously Armand O'Neill didn't work out, but Dave Kitson I did rate very highly.
So the John Beck days, they were interesting to say the least.
Yes, yes.
We know the stories about the pitch. We
Yes.
know the stories about the quality boards and the corners.
Yes, that's right.
How did you feel about that at the time? I mean, the success was fantastic.
I liked the idea that because we were successful, and I knew the players could play football. We knew, like Steve Claridge, and obviously he was pulled off if he started to beat a man. You can't do that. You've got to keep the ball in the middle. And his philosophy was, if the ball's in the penalty box, there's more chance of scoring. He doesn't want it fiddled around the midfield. His idea was to get the ball in that middle all the time. And we know with Dion he could score with his head, either foot, and hence he took a video up to Alex Ferguson of the same. And Alex Ferguson never actually saw him play in the flesh, but signed him on the video evidence.
Fantastic. Yeah, just on that subject, this may be just my imagination, but I remember Michael Cheetham being substituted after 20 minutes because he wasn't following the game plan.
Oh yes, well Steve Claridge I think probably would tell you he had to come off quite a lot through beating a man when he shouldn't be doing that. Yeah. Oh yes, it was rigid, the system, and that everyone says, and we were probably right, because he didn't change the system, we lost to Leicester. Everyone knew the system, all the other teams, and they knew how to play us in the end. And that's one of those things.
But you said you mentioned your ambitions. You said you had 3 ambitions. Let's look at your ambitions again.
Yes.
Your first was
to get in the Football League in 1970.
Tick.
Yeah, and then was to go to Wembley, which was 1990. Chesterfield. And I always remember chatting to, obviously I met many ex-managers there, and the referee, Roger Milford, I don't know if you remember him, used to have the long flowing hair. He said to me at half time, "You'll win." And I said, well, I'm not sure, because Kelvin Plummer of Chesterfield had a few shots and he looked dangerous. But obviously, I know it was close, 1-0, but we did it.
And we know who scored the goal that day?
Dion.
Yeah.
And I had the pleasure of shaking hands of all the players as they come up to receive the medals and everything. I was in that box.
And the third of your ambitions was to see the club, looking back, the third of your ambitions was to see the club in the...
Well, was then the Division 1, which we now the Premier Division. Well, I will see that. Perhaps if we move to Trumpington and things zoom off, we might get...
So we did come extremely close, because you alluded to it just about 2 minutes ago with the Leicester game.
Yes.
And we get through to the playoffs for the inaugural Premier League.
Yes.
Do you remember that game?
Oh yes. Well, we started off okay, but once we got behind and then he gambled, the substitutes come on and then we just folded. It was 5-0, I think.
And were you at that game?
Oh yes, at Leicester, yes. I took my dad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
But irrespective of that, it was so close to your third ambition being met.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, from there it was a downward spiral, and a pretty quick one after that as well.
Well, I realised the club had to sell the players. We obviously today's money wouldn't be that big, but at that time we had to pay the players to keep with us, extra money, so they stayed. And obviously then when we lost, there it was selling quite a few players.
Let's think of one particular game that happened around about that time. We had 2 fantastic cup runs.
Yes.
You'll remember. But the game that sticks in my memory, and I guess it's in yours somewhere too, is the game against Arsenal.
Yes, I can remember being in Arsenal ground and they closed the gates, and they'd never done that for a league Premier or league. I think there was 36,000. I think it was. And we did take the lead, Dion again. But it was Tony Adams who settled it. I think we lost 2-1.
We did lose 2-1 in the end.
Yeah, but yes, it was a good game.
Okay, my memory suggests that Dion equalised and then Tony Adams scored.
Right,
we can check those things.
Yes.
No worries with that. But yeah, fantastic. And I remember, and I hope you do too, that the Arsenal fans were actually whistling for the final whistle 5 minutes from the end, 10 minutes from the end.
Going back to when you went to Wembley against Chesterfield, was that the day that you were lucky enough to sit next to Bobby Moore?
Yes, he was reporting for the Sunday Sport, sorry, and he was there with his father. And we had, in front of me was the referees. Bobby Moore sat with his father beside me, and he didn't talk a lot, I must admit. He didn't say a lot. I think, well, obviously he was jotting down on the reporting of the game. But I've got, I believe, the only programme signed by him. And the only thing I can tell you after that game, Laurie McMenemy, whose son Chris McMenemy was assistant manager to Chesterfield, and he come up to me, obviously I'd got a scarf on. He said, "You're bloody happy, aren't you?" I won't forget that. It wasn't even the manager, but he was upset because they'd lost. Come over. I didn't think anything of him after that. I won't forget that, what he said to me.
Yeah. I've got to ask you, who do you know that got you into the Royal Box?
It was my son-in-law, who was a Barclays bank manager at the time, and obviously Barclays sponsored the league. And obviously, I asked the question as soon as we got to Wembley. Oh, crikey, this is my ambition. I want to go to Wembley. Can you get me some decent seats? And that's what it came up with. To have lunch prior to the game with the ex-managers and that, it was great.
Must have been quite a day.
Oh yeah, my dad never got over it.
Mm.
It was stuck in his memory because he'd never been close to these managers like I had. He didn't, he went, but he was watching from a distance, if you like, which probably a lot of people are today. They don't speak to the managers or see anyone, players or anything. So he was really over the joy.
What a fantastic turnaround from your dad taking you to the first and your earliest games, and suddenly you could take him to Wembley to see games.
I took him to Coventry when we were in the Cup, and obviously that Leicester game. So some of the big games I took him to, and yeah.
Fantastic.
Wembley obviously was the cream on the cake.
Indeed it was.
Yes.
Indeed it was. So let's move away from football just for
Yeah.
a little bit. I know your connection with the club, and many folk will be asking themselves. Now I'm sure a lot of kids ask their fathers, where did the plaque above the entrance on
The
on
nameplate.
stand?
Well,
the nameplate. Cambridge United train.
It was following going to Wembley. I, in association with Newton Replicas, who did British Rail plates. Obviously, I'm associated with a certain train, St Ivor Gresley, so I was in contact with them a lot, making plates for trips. So I asked them, could you make a Cambridge United plate? There was no problem to them. But obviously, Reg at the time, when I brought it to the ground, he said, "Oh, I'd want that in the boardroom." I said, "Well, as Reg, there's only one condition it's coming. It's got to go over a tunnel." And John Holmes, who was a commercial manager at the time, backed me, and it was put up, and my plate's underneath it, saying that I presented at the club in 1990, which was the year we went to Wembley.
Indeed.
And that small one there is a miniature of it.
It does. I'm sure that clears up a question for many fans, certainly me. And
A lot of people have asked, particularly in the early days, when Andy Pincher was the church secretary, how do you get a plate with, there was never a train. No, there wasn't, but
I just love the you mentioned the tunnel. That was
yeah, I mean, Norwich City have got one now, but their original one was burnt down when the stand was burnt down, and I was there when they got presented with the new one. Norwich. I mean, there's several clubs sold them. Darlington sold theirs for 60,000, which was obviously original plate to raise money.
Darlington, of course, railway town through and through.
Yeah.
So much history there.
But there's not many on show. I don't now. I don't know. Other Norwich Cities is on their tunnel, but I can't name another club who've got their plate exposed.
So we're moving towards the end game now with our interview. But let's before we talk about the late 90s and the dismal times we went through in the first half of the 2000s, because we'll probably skip over quite a lot of that. You must have looked back in the year 2000 and to the club, and you're going on 50 years of supporting it then, and thought to yourself, this isn't the same place. It's changed so much. So many players, so many memories, so many games. Is there any? I know it's really hard, but is there any one or two players would be your all-time favourites, or any one game or two games?
I'll mention one, and there's Dave Kitson. I did sponsor him when he was at the club, and I followed him to Reading, etc. Around, and he rung me when I wrote to him and said, looking forward to seeing you play against us with Oxford. And he actually emailed me to say he'd retired on the 22nd of July. He actually emailed me that day to tell me he'd retired and wouldn't be coming. So I maintained a sort of relationship with him. He's into a clothing business, and that he's quite.
He's a clever man.
Yeah, and he does a little bit for BBC on the sport, as you've probably seen.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so fantastic. So we're going to have to move through the dismal days of the various of our friends.
Just one thing, sorry Tom, just one thing that springs to mind. When you got the railway plate done, was there a stained glass window as well?
Yeah, I had it was a plumber in Hilton who did them, and I think I went to some event over there, and I saw his work, and I asked him, could he do one of the United Crests? And he said, yeah. He's actually done. I've got one of my train as well. So, yeah, and I presented it to Reg Smart at an AGM, shareholders, which at that time we were going to build a new stand at the north end with a reception, and I said to Reg, that can go in the reception window, and he said yeah, but obviously that day has not arrived as yet. So that is still at the ground. It's of the crest of the club crest, because they did change it, but that was only for the centenary year.
Yeah.
Because I did speak to Dave Dockett. I said, oh yeah, you're changing it. He said it's only for this year.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to skate over the dismal years where we fell into the conference, because they just depressed me, to be honest. But when we got to the conference, it was a whole change of attitude. You know, I think like most clubs who've come down out of the Football League, I think the first season was a bit of a shock for United. The first couple of years, actually, very, very hard work, and the standard of football not bad at all, to be honest, in a lot of games. But then we got Gary Brabham and Paul Carden came along, and before that we had Willie and
Jimmy Quinn was a manager I got on well with. I'll tell you how it happened. I was actually in McDonald's on Newmarket Road about 8:30 time, having a coffee in there, just reading the paper. In comes Jimmy, and I called him over, and he sat with me. We had a coffee, and would you believe I met him every Friday morning at that time, chatting about football players. I remember at my last meeting with him, he was going to collect his office stuff. He'd been sacked, and I remember him saying to me, "Don't worry about me. I'll be all right. I'm going to do a little bit for Satanta, etc. You know, he'll find something else." But he went through all the players. He would talk to you what he thought about individual players.
Right, so you remember then that we got to Wembley under Jimmy Quinn. You say, I mean, as you told us, you met him on a regular basis, and charming man from what you're saying, and always willing to talk about football.
He talked about what he thought of player, and afterwards I thought, why did you play McEverley? And I can't think of the other chap's name. Tall guy, we played two centre forwards at the end. He was trying to throw the dice, if you like.
Yeah.
But McEverley, he said, was a lazy player. Sometimes would turn up late for training and all sorts of things. I forget what he said about the other player, but he wasn't very, forthcoming that he was a good player.
And then we moved into the days with Gary Brabham and Paul Carden.
Yeah, I got on well with Paul. I spoke to him a lot, and I thought he was excellent player, good motivator. He was on the pitch, and he got that little extra drive.
Have you noticed that they've both just been signed for Southport? They're both Southport's manager.
Gary
Brabham,
yes.
and he's taking Paul with him.
Oh right. Well, Scousers. I mean, if you remember at that time, if you wasn't the Scouser, you might not be in the 10 days. I was sad to see Paul leave us, actually.
Yeah, but then we moved on, didn't we? We moved on, and obviously there had been quite a bit of money spent about that team, so there was a lot of retrenchment, a lot of pulling back. But let's stay positive, and let's think of the last 2 or 3 years. Dave Doggett came in. Now, there's a man who seems to have his finger on the pulse in terms of getting the finances correct, and everything else will follow. Yeah. Have you had many dealings with Dave?
Yeah, Dave. Yeah, I've spoke to him a lot about how things are run, and I don't know whether it's took place this season, but he would like virtually everyone who's working within the club to be voluntary, so that we don't have to pay someone to sell programmes, someone to be on the gates, etc., etc. If we had more volunteers, that was his aim. I don't know whether he'll totally achieve that, but that's an ambition of his, so that we have more money generated within the club. And obviously now we're looking either to rebuild the stadium or move. I don't know. Now City have got their permission, and the university have got permission to build massive site over there, which would include a few football pitches. I don't see why we shouldn't get permission, but I know a lot of people don't want us to move. I'm fairly amenable whether we move or not. I mean, I would like a new ground because I know we could never make the existing ground quite right. We might generate a bit more income, but I don't think it would be the perfect answer.
I can see where you're going on that one, yeah. There's no reason why Cambridge United can't build a community stadium, because they're very much under the dugget becoming a community club, and I believe that's the words that he tends to use.
Yeah.
And so far it's working. Let's think about the season just gone. Surely a highlight in your fans' experience.
Well, obviously we went to Wembley twice against Devon clubs, Exeter and Torquay, and sadly come away disappointed. This time we went twice, Gosport, alright, a lower club, but we won, which probably give us momentum for going against Gateshead, who on the face of the playoffs were pretty fair. It wasn't going to be easy, and till we got that first goal, quite honestly it was pretty even. And once we got that goal, I think their heads dropped slightly, and obviously, we went on to win comfortably.
But what a day at Wembley! I mean, the weather could not have been better.
No, it was pretty hot.
The crowd couldn't have been much better. We outnumbered them by 4 or 5 to 1.
Yeah.
The noise, mostly from our end.
Well,
and 2 goals.
We had regularly taken nearly 20,000 on the previous games. So the support came out, unfortunately we can't say they all come back to the Abbey, unfortunately, but we did take them to Wembley. People did come. So we can't complain about that.
So how do you feel about this season as it's gone so far? Obviously 7,000 there in the first game, 6,500 there against Luton. We've got the capacity to bring people in through the gates if the games are right. How do you feel about the team? How do you feel about the manager?
Well, unfortunately we've had a few injuries. I mean, I think one of the biggest misses, the midfielder Tom Champion, I don't think is easily to replace. I know they picked him out at Dartford as him and the other guy were the 2 best players, and I think he chose right there because he is an extremely good player, and he's brought in some players who probably have not all, Kezia Power hasn't set the game on fire this season, but we know he potentially can, and we seem to at the moment spreading the goals around. We haven't got a leading goal scorer in the charts. You think, you must have someone who's going to score 20 goals. Well, we've not really got that, but we have got players who perhaps get a couple and then have a quiet period and get another goal, and someone else picks up.
Well, we have Donaldson, Elliott, and we have Apaya.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan, I've said I only want 1 free kick a game, like you did at Wembley. I understand he does a lot of practice on bending that ball round, and he's scored 1 or 2 this season like it, and I think it's very good.
So what do you think of it? What do you see as the future for Cambridge United? Do you see a new ground? Do you see the team improving?
I would like to. Well, I think the team will improve as now the injuries come, and obviously we've got Ian Miller to come back in the new year. I would say we would be comfortably in the top half, and we could be close to the playoffs. Could be. It's always difficult to say without knowing what injuries might take place. But a fully fit squad, I would say we could quite edge the playoffs.
a lot's going to depend on the Christmas period, isn't it? It always does.
Well,
Just that
yes.
4 weeks.
Well, say it's injuries, and injuries unfortunately have hampered us a little bit, and particularly those 3 losses at home. Possibly, if we'd had a full squad, that wouldn't have been. I mean, they were only odd goals, but you know, it's been a very close. Well, every game is pretty close, I must admit. This division is faster, and teams don't need many opportunities. If they get an opportunity, they'll stick it in. There's no doubt about that. It is sharper, and I think everyone who said there's no difference between the Conference and League Two, well, there certainly is.
Yeah. So are you enjoying your football?
Oh yes, yeah.
The style is so different from some that we've seen. You know, it's very much on the ground. It's very much a passing
Yeah.
game.
I will be up there tomorrow morning, polishing the ball up, ready for TV for them. And obviously it's an early kick-off.
It is 12:15 on Saturday.
Yeah.
Just before we wind up, Alan.
I just going back to just the year we went out of the Football League.
Yes.
We had the French manager, Hervé
Yeah.
Renard, and I just wanted to ask your memories on. There was Claude de Roy and Hervé Renard. That was a bit of an escapade.
Yeah, although I used to bump into round the town with his wife shopping. He was very pleasant. I can't say nothing against the guy. You know, he did what he could do, and I think the only thing which I perhaps regret is when we sold the ground, and I was there that night.
Okay.
We were forced into a corner to vote to sell the ground, and it was all laid out nicely. Oh, you'll be able to buy the North End back 1 year, and so on. Well, all that money came in, and you think of it, 2 million, or nearly 2 million, and that money disappeared very quickly, because I know one big cheque landed on Hervé Renard's door in the south of France of the money they owed him, along with other people who were in debt. They got the cheques. Now, if we'd have actually gone into administration, they wouldn't have got them sort of cheques. That money was just sort of frittered.
So it just seems a funny way to go to bring French managers in when you're looking for a manager. It was just it was odd.
When your back's to the wall.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I don't know who made the decisions then. I think you had change of boardroom, and till Jez sort of got his finger on the pulse. I think it was a bit airy-fairy, particularly the George Rolls era. I mean, dear oh dear. I mean, I understand we had 3 prospective managers on the site of the Abbey Stadium, and he was only going to promote one for the job, and that's why our friend who from Leighton Orient disappeared, because he heard about what was happening. I mean, I think the other guy was from Ebbsfleet, ex-player Liam Daish,
Yes.
who was on site as well. You know, they all thought they got the job. It was how odd to run up, you know. So.
Okay, we'll just do a quick one. Okay, Barry, it's been fantastic to speak to you this
That's
afternoon.
quite
Your
all right.
memories over 60 years, in fact, which is fantastic, and so lucid and prepared to talk. We were told before we came here, just ask him a question, he'll talk for a long time, and that makes Alan and I's job so much easier and so much more enjoyable. The interviews always go best whenever Alan and I actually enjoy them, and I've certainly enjoyed this one. So thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Barry.